Then There's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, their legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. As the last year of the 2019-2020 legislative session moves forward and a new decade begins, the members of the California State Senate and Assembly are shuffling and triaging their policy priorities and picking up where they left off on tackling the boatload of opportunities and not-so-easy answers to crises that are facing our state and its varied communities. All of our state lawmakers are balancing the needs of their districts and constituents while keeping their eyes on the prize of creating equitable and foresightful policy that paves the way to help all Californians thrive moving forward. In my opinion, one of the lawmakers who is most effective at both tweaking at the details of public policy and perceiving in full panorama how that policy affects our state, our country, our globe at large, then and now and moving forward, is Senate Majority Leader Robert Hertzberg. Senator Hertzberg represents the 18th Senate District in the San Fernando Valley, including Van Nuys, the city of San Fernando, parts of Burbank, a slice of Southern California that he has lived in or been tied to for a large part of his 50 years in politics. If you Google Robert Hertzberg, the description that pops up is American politician, which hardly scratches the surface of Senator Hertzberg's career in the public and private sector. Local politics in Southern California, a term as Speaker of the California State Assembly at the beginning of this millennium, an internationally known and traveled clean energy entrepreneur, and then he returned to the state capitol in 2014, now serving in the legislature's upper house, and he is currently our Senate Majority Leader. I could go 50 pages listing Senator Hertzberg's experience and bona fides, but whether he's expressing excitement about tweaking his latest legislative composition or excitedly sharing a story about his musician son David's latest classical composition, Robert Hertzberg leans in with his contagious combo of heart and smart. Senator Hertzberg was my boss back when he was Speaker in 2000 and 2001, and one of the few Speaker bosses I had who actually knew my name. And I am just as proud to work with him now in the state Senate and very privileged to have him take some time out of his busy schedule to come join me here on our podcast. Senator Hertzberg, welcome to Then There's California.
Wow, I don't know what to say, Brian. Thank you very, very much.
Hey, I'm a big fan. What can I tell you?
Hey, I'm a big fan of you and all the work that you've done. It's really quite extraordinary. It's a lot of work to make this democracy work for all of us.
That's the theme of what we're talking about here. 50 years. That's incredible. I mean, you're here to start a new decade, too. You're not missing a beat, are you?
Not missing a beat. And you know, it's interesting. You know, lots of times you get involved in politics for a long time and people call it a game. I don't see it as a game. It's my DNA. It really is a deeper mission for me. And it is, as you say, a panorama view married with a tremendous attention to detail in terms of how I work. I came back to government. You know, it was hard for me. It wasn't like I could make more money than I was making before doing the other stuff. It was really kind of seeing the need. As I traveled the world, I saw, and I've been to every province, special district, autonomous region, I think, in municipality in China. I've been to dozens of countries in Africa, and the rule of law and the importance of what we have and how critical it is in so many areas of law to engage. And so I made a pretty big decision to come back. I'm not someone who, you don't see me a lot on these kind of media outlet things. I'm just quietly behind the scenes trying to work on the big stuff, and I really care about it, and I'm trying to engage.
It's funny as you're telling me this and talking about the world traveling that you've done and the worldly perspective. And yes, we are the biggest state in the union. We're the third, fourth largest economy in the world. And yet to some degree, I'm just thinking, knowing Bob Hertzberg, the legislature seems like a little small for you, for your ideas and your ambitions.
No, it isn't. I'll tell you why. Because California, one of the things I've learned as I've traveled the world, you can go anywhere on the planet and everybody know about California. I don't know what the magic is, whether it comes from the great story of Queen Calafia in 1540 that informed the naming of this place, of this inspirational place. But people don't know much about Biloxi, Mississippi, or Arkansas, or Kansas, or any place in between. California has a magic. The immigrant experience is not just about people that are Spanish speakers, but hundreds of languages come to California from all over the world. And so we really do have an inspirational catalytic effect. It really is true. And so it's quite important in my judgment to set the tone in California to help lead the larger discussion. And that's what I'm doing on areas of bail reform and privacy and taxation and the kinds of stuff that nobody wants to talk about but is necessary for the road for the future. Absolutely.
As long as I have known you and known about your career, I was struggling to remember how you actually began your career. What alchemy of ambition, and curiosity and desire and savvy, a love of binders,
love of binders, that's it.
Came together to get this 50-year career started.
In this technology world, nobody does binders anymore. They do
right.
these technology things. But my old man was a constitutional lawyer. 5 boys in my family, and we'd sit around the table, and my dad would talk about all the cases. Don't forget, in the 60s and 70s, you had the Warren Court and all these various things, these big meaty issues that were engaged. So this became my life, right? We're talking about Stanley versus Georgia and rights of people and the rights of privacy and in these various cases and what those meant. It was the civil rights days. And so it informed my thinking, and I always wanted to be a lawyer. And it evolved, really. The first big thing, I remember as a little kid, I worked organizing a bond issue for a youth center for the community, which we got passed. And then my first big effort was Merv Dimely, who got elected to the Assembly in 62, to State Senate in 66, and to Lieutenant Governor in 74. I was his travel aide, and I got to travel through all 58 counties and drove him. And there was no cell phones in those days, and so I'd sit and listen, and you went everywhere, and it was extraordinary. And I helped dozens and dozens, literally well over 100 candidates get elected, because I wanted to help them. And I saw, quite frankly, that you sit there and you work your heart out to get them elected, and you see them, after wearing out dozens of pairs of shoes to win an issue, then they start compromising themselves. And they didn't have the big picture frame, which informs my mind, informs my son's mind as a composer. And so I like to look at how it all fits together. When I first ran for office, I read all 29 codes of the state of California and outlined them all. If you go to my office, you'll see a big, huge chart there, and the Constitution, because I wanted to see how the parts fit together. Because at the end of the day, we all walk around with little cell phones, and we know what the surface of it looks like.
Right.
We in politics are the people that do the back of the phone, all that electronics. And so it's not the exciting stuff, it's the stuff that make it work.
Great metaphor. If you take a quilt or you take a blanket and you turn it over, you can see all the tapestry, you can see all the lines that are not visible to the beauty on the outside. But
that's right. So I focus a lot on that stuff. And, at the end of the day, you got to deliver for folks. And that's how you do it. I think it's a mistake to think that there's such a thing as a legacy or the like. You always see, like, on these late night shows, they'll show a picture of Jack Kennedy or Harry Truman or Lyndon Johnson to the public, and they don't know who it is. A friend of mine just told me recently that a large portion of the population can't name all 3 branches of government, and some can't name 1 branch of government. Not to say that that's wrong. It's a complicated life. There's a lot to learn. And it's not necessary for people to engage in the details. It's our job to engage in the details and not to bore them with them. But you just fix the problem, make opportunities work for folks, think forward down the line and anticipate the problems and fix them. And the big challenges in government, if I can say, that I've experienced in all my years in government is that so many politicians are risk averse. And the truth of the matter is, what I found is, take the risk, jump off the building. Do it honorably, do it with credibility, do it for the right reasons, and you're not going to lose. Too many politicians are scared. They're worried about impression management, of what people think about them or what their legacy is. Just get the work done, man. That's all that matters.
Leon Panetta spoke to the PPIC this last week, the luncheon here in Sacramento, and he pretty much said the exact same thing.
Really?
To be a politician, you have to risk.
You got to risk.
You have to take the risk to achieve public policy and to do something right. And if you're doing the right thing, people will come behind you.
They will. They will. I've experienced that. I'm working on this book, and there's a section I have calling Batting 999. If you were a baseball player and you batted 999, you were the best ball player in the history of the planet, right? But politicians are scared to swing at the bat, because what happens is they take a video of you swinging the one time you miss, and they say, that Hertzberg couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, and they put $10 million behind it and say, don't elect him, he can't hit the ball, right? You got to swing. You got to swing, and you got to go. That's why I'm doing tax reform. What dumb politician will work on tax reform? I'm working on it for 10 years. Why? Because if we don't fix the volatility of tax reform in California, all the other things we're working on go to the wind. Take the bullet, bite it, get in the game, and give it your best shot.
I don't want to digress, but you mentioned a book. You're writing a book?
I am.
Is it autobiographical?
No,
politics?
No, it's ideas. It's ideas. It's kind
Fantastic.
of it's morphed. I don't believe in the cult of personality. I never get out there and talk about my own life. I talk about ideas. And not to say it's right or wrong. It's just my approach. And I'm working on this whole rich-poor divide and how do we really engage. We've got the growth of capital at a much faster pace than we have the growth of people's ability to earn livings. We've got this extraordinary tension that's going on and being exploited at the national level. Democracy requires a level of confidence. It requires a level of optimism and trust by people in the system. And I'm trying to craft kind of the old school way of how to get there. The basic premise is this. You read some of these great writers. They give you great stories about how it is, these great stories about you can do this and you can do that. And at the end, they just say, we need the political will. Well, guess what? I'm the political will. I'm the guy who's got to go and figure it out and do the compromise. And everybody screams at you because you didn't make it perfect exactly the way they wanted, because you got to move forward and you got to make stuff happen. It marries kind of a visionary view with the practitioner's view of how do you really get it done. People talk about this idea of universal basic income. To me, that's dumber than a box of rocks. Why? People need the dignity of work, man. You know, it's just going to take a check. People want to be involved. They want to somehow take the dignity of it. I don't believe in that stuff. And that, to me, is a perfect example where here's an idea that comes out of Silicon Valley that, oh, let's just give people a bunch of money and solve the problem. You're going to create so many unintended consequences that are inconsistent with human nature, right? Just let's do pragmatic approaches that I want to use as a result of the experience that I've gained by being in the process for so many years.
You're setting up so much here for what we want to talk about. Here you are, like the rest of us, beginning a new decade. California, the country, the globe, though, is a different place than it was when you started your career 50 years ago, for better and for worse.
Well, it is different. The United States had 52% of the GDP, world GDP. You know, when I was speaker, I remember the prime minister of China was coming to California, and the head of government relations went and told the governor at the time, hey, he wants to meet me. And he says, why? He says, well, Mr. Governor, because your economy is bigger than his, right? That was 20 years ago. Totally changed. Technology's changed. Capital flow, taxation policy. In the old days when Eisenhower was president, you could have a huge tax bill, 80, 90%. Today, you can invest your money anywhere in the world. Capital moves, labor moves. It's completely different. I think the falsity of the Internet has been extraordinarily valuable in access of information to people and all kinds of things and giving voice and opportunity. But at the same time, it's given opportunity to folks that often aren't really sincere. You know, I don't think there's more racism in this country today than there was. I really don't. I just think there's tools available. When there's 3 people sitting on the park bench in some part of the country saying bad things, they never had a voice. Now they sit there and they put that voice out, and they all come together in one little area. A couple thousand of them come together in a country of 330 million, and it creates impressions that aren't really accurate. So I think it's really different. You're sitting there and the ability to put up stuff on the Internet by, you know, a couple of people and the impact on the system, the inability to sit and compromise. Compromise is a core value. There's a group of people over here that you believe and trust. There's a group of people over here you believe and trust. They have different points of view. Come together to respect each other's interests versus just finding a place to stand on and scream from the hills and get noise from that and raise money from that. It's very different.
We could spend a couple of hours on some of this. Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm thinking of all sorts of tangents and questions. Let's zoom in real quick. Talk about your 18th Senate District. Everybody knows about the San Fernando Valley, but it's your home.
Right.
It's been your home for years, and as much as you've traveled the world, you keep coming back to it. You know it.
That's right.
And the Valley is a mix of everything: history, business, industry, education, wealth, poverty, diverse communities.
That's right.
As any other part of the world. Tell us about your Valley.
Well, I think it really reflects kind of a core sentiment of where America is at the center. It'd be the 5th largest city in America if it was a separate city. Literally the 5th largest city. That's extraordinary if you just think about it for a minute. And it grew up at a later time in our history of Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles is a city of 284 annexations. I'm probably the only person who knows that, but I actually have the map on my wall in my office.
I am not surprised that you know
I do.
That. Yes.
And those annexations came later because the San Fernando Valley, before all the water issues, were separate cities. The city of Van Nuys was a separate incorporated city. All these various communities were separate, and they all merged in except for the city of San Fernando, Burbank, Glendale, and became part of L.A. because they wanted access to the water, and they became the funding stream to be able to build the aqueduct. And so anybody who watched Chinatown knows that story, which is relatively accurate. But it really was a bedroom community. And it's been interesting because now 60% of the people that live in the valley work in the valley. It's really, the industry's grown up pretty dramatically. It's generally perceived as a white flight community. Absolutely wrong. It's the most integrated, diverse community in all of Southern California by orders of magnitude. I have every nationality on the street I live on in Van Nuys. It's just absolutely extraordinary. And yet it's an old impression about a community that's very, very different. And it's a place of opportunity, largely Latino. My district is 58% Latino. And people are looking for hope, looking for opportunity. And part of these arguments that we face are really interesting because I think it's at the core of what it is. And I like it because it grounds me in the big picture. I don't represent San Francisco, which is different, just different place than most of the rest of California. I think what I represent is the heart of California and really where the votes are. And it's the heart of the United States. It really is a representative community.
It's making me think you're a very ecumenical guy. You're a white man. How do you reach out? How do you get these communities of color in your district to respond to you? And yes, your policies may resonate with them, but they don't necessarily see themselves when they see you. How do you cross that divide?
Well, I'll tell you, it's been interesting. You know, I started out, Merv Diamond was African American, and I started probably the first 10 or 15 campaigns I worked on in South LA. I then worked in the East Side, worked on probably close to 100 campaigns. I'm very comfortable in diverse communities and worked very, very hard. You know, I was the only white guy on the Chinatown Service Center board. I've worked in extraordinarily diverse communities, and what I found is when you show up, you show respect, you do the homework for the community, it doesn't matter, right? I got frustrations in community often, and people say, I'm not voting for somebody because they have this kind of last name or that kind of last name. I want somebody that shows up and does the work. And so I've been quite successful in that regard because of a long history, and people know who I am, and they know what my history is. They know what my values are. And at the end of the day, just like everybody else in the American dream, they just want to get it done. I've never found a problem in that regard. It's actually pretty exciting.
All right, I mentioned at the outset that everyone here is back at work picking up the pieces of what was not finished at the end of last year and starting with fresh ideas to integrate into their 2020 agenda and focusing on the issues that really linger for California and threaten to really become crises if we don't cooperate. And I know that's easier said than done. Everyone has their agenda. I know you do too. And I wanted to title this podcast, The Top 5 Things Majority Leader Robert Hertzberg is Excited About.
I don't know if you can limit it to 5. That's my problem.
Right. That's right. Well, we'll take the first 5.
I got about 100.
We'll see how long we go. That he's excited about or preoccupied with in 2020. And really, I meant it when I said it earlier, and we talked about this already, your gift for toggling between the macro and the micro. Even in your presentations on your bills on the floor, you get up and you don't just say, Senate bill, et cetera, does this or that.
Right.
You put it in perspective,
Always.
a bigger perspective always to say, why are we doing this? Here's the bigger picture.
That's right.
I mean, really, that is the syllabus of what you do here.
That's right. It's a problem when you come in and say, I rise in support of AB 126 that does this and whatever. It has to be contextual. One of the problems we have in government is to define what the hell we're doing. Like the word district. I hate the word district. I represent communities, man. District's a Soviet term. It's out of the old days. I represent communities. I take care of people. Some of the stuff that we do, our nose is too far up against the glass. So that's exactly what I do. I literally was just talking about housing in my office before coming up here. And I'd finished reading a big article in The Economist on the plane coming up this morning and trying to look at the big picture. What happened with planning in California in the 70s? What did we do and why? What decisions we made? What unintended consequences do we make? What unintended consequences are we making now? We always tend to make these decisions in crises, which is just, in my judgment, a big mistake. We need to have the big frame. And exactly right. What is the problem we're trying to solve, and how does this do it? That is exactly how I think, and it's critically important because I always am worried about the law of unintended consequences, the most important of all laws.
All right, let's talk about that approach that you have on these issues, homelessness and housing.
Yeah.
We have what some have called an intolerable social failure here in California. Nearly half of the country's unsheltered population lives here in the state.
That's right.
The good news is you and your colleagues in state and local government, as one article put it, are finally internalizing the seriousness. Bad news is, still seems like we're grasping at straws, that we're trying to find whatever's politically expedient to put a Band-Aid on things. Homelessness and the housing crisis are not linked in every way, but they are linked in many, many ways.
That's right.
Here we are in 2019. This is a question that comes up over and over again. Why are we still having the problem on both of these issues?
I'm the wrong guy to ask that question.
But you're the perfect guy.
But it's a bunch of issues. But the question is this, and we saw this in Los Angeles recently. The bottom line in government is people got to believe you and you got to deliver. Cut all the garbage about, I'm putting all this money and cutting all this and all this kind of stuff. We got to make it happen. In Los Angeles, the voters voted for a bond issue. They voted for a tax, and they are mad as hell because they don't feel that enough has happened. Now, arguably, when I go talk to various officials in the city and county, they tell me all the things they've done. And my attitude is, I'm sorry, I don't really care. The question is, you got to fix the problem. No one cares that the population's increased. You fixed it or not fixed it. I wrote a check. I was willing to increase my taxes. I was willing to pay for a bond. I gave you the money. Fix the problem, right? It's that simple. So I am informed by a sense of urgency that we have to inspire confidence in folks. We can't sit back and offer solutions that are, we'll change these rules. It'll be in effect in 5 years, or change this rule or change that rule. One of the things I liked last year what Governor Newsom did in a trailer bill, and then subsequently Assemblymember Santiago did, and I argued on the floor and put in an urgency bill, was we literally said that as it relates to these homeless centers, that we eliminate the CEQA as long as the matter is on public land. Okay? Real impact. I went to Los Angeles. They said, well, we used to have a 180-day approval process. We're down to 14. I said, not good enough. It needs to be a day. Right? That's the kind of thing we're looking for, number one. Number two, if you're going to deal with housing, again, urgency. Urgency. Nobody sleeps on the streets. Period. End of issue. You cannot tolerate that in a society that has any moral component to it. So I'm focused on government land. And what does government land mean? Government land doesn't just mean the state land. It could mean city land, county land, special district land, utility district land. I don't care. Taxpayers own the land. There's three things that matter when you're building housing. One, how much does the land cost? If it costs you $5 million, you ain't having affordable housing. Two, what's your labor cost? Which you're not going to shortchange labor. That's not right. You're just creating another problem. And three, what do your building materials cost? And I guess four, obviously, the approval process. So if we could eliminate the approval process down to a very short period of time, we could do a deal where we can get land at $1 a year for a leased land if we get a not-for-profit developer to come in and develop this. We've dramatically increased the speed to be able to develop and dramatically reduce the costs. So I'm focused like a laser beam. So what does that mean? We in my district, because I'm old school, hands-on, I've had over 400 interns in my office. If you come there, it looks like a Google office with the clouds on the wall and the flat-screen TVs and the beanbag chairs and all that stuff. It's fantastic. And I have all these kids, and they're just unbelievable. That's one of the changes that have happened.
Yes.
Because before interns had a more limited role. Today with their computer, they can do so much work. It's incredible. So we went and we found 3,140 pieces of land that were owned by the government in the San Fernando Valley. 3,140. I didn't care if they're owned by the federal government, state government. They're owned by the taxpayers. And then we literally had the students went and looked at every one through Google Maps. Another cool thing because of technology. And we found 198 that were actual parcels. Now, they may have been committed for other things, but government speak is, oh, well, that's not surplus land. We have a plan for that in 2028. Sorry, Charlie, it's surplus land. We need to build some housing there. So I'm looking at this and saying, can we go to local governments? We give them so much money. We're taking this land. We're going to expedite it. We're going to give it to a not-for-profit developer and really try to expedite it because we have to engage in realistic behavior that allows it. And the governor has done a whole surplus land thing. We just saw his executive order. Check, done. Cool. By my conversations with him and his team, they get it to the bone. So we just got to deliver. And I'm not interested in the conversations about stuff that's 5 and 10 years out. We can deal with that. But right now, we've got to inspire confidence to folks that we're dealing with these issues for them and that their tax money's working.
Can you get local government to cooperate, have the mutual attitude with state government to deal with the housing issue and, as a result, deal with the homeless issue?
Well, the reason I'm pushing so hard on government land and actually trying to get as much government land from locals as possible is because once you engage in that morass of stuff and the approval process and who has what power and then who litigates and what does that mean? Like, forget it. Okay, great. You can argue all day long. We have to solve the problem. I'm focused on deliverables. So if we can transfer land or utilize state land, we don't have the local approvals. We don't have to engage in that fight. And we can show to the public that we're actually creating results.
The governor's homeless task force has urged California to treat this problem as an intolerable social failure by making shelter a constitutional requirement, a legally enforceable mandate. They have backed off on that particular attitude as we speak and are proposing a constitutional amendment requiring the state and local governments to provide shelter. Can that pass? Can that be enforced?
Yes. And the reason I think so, look, I kind of take a different view. I'm a little bit more of a hard case on this, even though I'm a pretty progressive Democrat. And that is, instead of the right to shelter, nobody lives on the streets. Period. You got to start with a mentality that nobody lives on the streets, whether they're almost homeless because their rent's too high or whatever it may be. I understand that there's issues of people that want to live on the streets. I know many of them, actually. But let's start with who we can start with. According to Mark Ridley Thomas, a third of the people in my county that I'm in Los Angeles, want to get off the streets. A lot of these are families and kids and, oh my God, and seniors and stuff like that. It's just horrible. To me, the tone is really important. Nobody lives on the streets. Secondly, this court says that, oh, well, you can't take them off the streets. That's not what it says. It says exactly what you just said, Brian, which is as long as you have a place for them, you can offer an alternative. Let's do that. I completely agree. whatever it takes, we've got to solve this problem. It's so painful to do this. It's unbelievable. There's just no middle ground. And, it's our failure if we don't get it done.
As I've said, you've authored legislation that directly affects some of the homeless population and their property and their safety, dealing with their pets and also with their safe spaces to be. You want to talk about your legislation?
I was sitting there thinking about, again, what's my framework? Get something done immediately. Quit all government process crap, right? Forget that stuff. I'm in L.A. I'm sitting there talking to people. What do they tell me? 25% of the people in L.A. have pets and they won't go into the shelters, not because they won't go into the shelters and there's empty beds, because they don't take care of their pets. So we put $5 million. I just asked the governor for more money now. I met with him to do this. It's the simplest, cheapest way, because it's the only living thing in their life that they have a relationship with. We're spending billions of dollars. It was $5 million, has an impact on people. How smart is that? Again, save parking lots. I'm at the Temple Hillel in my district, and they got people there that want to put people in their parking lot. The rabbi says, we'll open the parking lot. Help us. People of goodwill trying to engage. So, again, what's the question? Get it done immediately. Get it done immediately. Get it done immediately. No delay. And so whether it's government land, whether it's safe parking lots, whether it's pets, my framework is not about the big picture process, because that can be down the line. But right now, this is a matter of urgency, and everything that we can do that helps with the urgency is really important. And also for the police, I talk to the police in my, I go to every neighborhood council in my district. I'm old school, even though it's all LA, and I show up at all these neighborhood councils and really listen to these folks and the impact of the police it takes to deal with this stuff away from other issues that are important to the community is something that the San Fernando Valley is deeply concerned about.
So we're home to half of the country's homeless. We are also home to the country's highest concentration of billionaires. Don't we first have to look at our economic and social divides, which are growing larger and larger, before we can fully address those other issues?
Well, first of all, I think you have to fully address some of those issues, the urgent one of homelessness. Number two, read my book. That's exactly what I'm doing in my book. Read my book. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm looking at how do you fund government without it being confiscatory going forward? How do you give employees or people that work for companies that don't have pensions who are now going to live? When 1935, when Social Security passed, the average person lived to 68. Social Security happened at 65. You didn't have much exposure, right? Now people are living to 150. Who knows? With this new stuff. You got to change that game and give people confidence. What happened in this country that caused the change last time around is that we weren't touching people's interests. We didn't touch their emotions and their fears and their concern about the future and the future of work and artificial intelligence and all of these things that they hear about, and they think, oh my God, I'm a truck driver, I'm going to lose my job, or whatever the case may be. Now, whether that's true or not, it informed their fear, which informs the sentiment that we're seeing nationally. That is the framework of my book.
Number two on the list of issues among many that Senator Robert Hertzberg is concerned about or focused on, wildfires and the power blackouts. California has seen a handful of its most devastating fires just in the last couple of years, so we're having to reckon with the impact of climate change and what that means to our firefighting methods, insurance hassles for property owners in these high-risk areas that can't renew their coverage or get coverage. And one of our largest private utilities facing $30 billion in liabilities, a worn-out power grid that seems to point in some cases to the start of some of these fires. And 2019 then brings us this not-so-new dynamic for you, of course, we'll talk about that, of blackouts. And the utility companies are turning off our power. And give me some of your perspective on those two issues of the wildfires and the blackouts and what we're doing with this utility.
Well, the first thing is last year, until we passed the legislation, I don't think I slept a good night because I was speaker during the energy crisis in 2000. And, that was painful.
Different situation, but same questions.
Well, it wasn't a different situation. I'll tell you why it wasn't a different situation. Because at the end of the day, it was all about the financial viability of our investor-owned utilities. The reason for the financial viability was different, but it still related to the same thing. And the thing that kept me up at night was these investor-owned utilities get ratings from like Standard & Poor's and Moody's, these rating agencies. If the rating agencies turn around and downgrade them, the whole house of cards of their financial structure goes away. Why? Because all these loans they've got, Edison had $16 billion of loans, they all have a default provision that says, if your rating goes down, it's an event of default. If it's an event of default, literal bankruptcy. And so once you have bankruptcy, you had one in PG&E, which was created for a bunch of odd reasons. You could have the other ones. And it just would totally have dramatic impact. 70% of the energy in California comes from investor-owned utilities. So I was really worried about that. We corrected that in a very big way, in a pretty elegant way. The governor's office was incredible. Senator Dodd, a number of other folks. Thank God. Halavai, as they say in Yiddish. My mother, actually, she'll be listening. But in any event...
Mrs. Hertzberg, hello.
Hello, Mom. So she's 95 and going strong.
Wonderful.
So in any event, so I was really worried about that. And now, this larger issue, we've got these archaic laws in dealing with what are called inverse condemnation, where if there's a fire, there's strict liability and who gets what and what the insurance companies get and the victims get and stuff. It's very, very, very challenging. And again, as you correctly noted, we've got people's insurance going through the roof. We've got people building in areas that are on how do we deal with those guys? If a branch falls on a utility line, it's really a big problem, and it undermines confidence in California, in our economy. One of the things I saw as I traveled around the world in my 12 years out of government was, all the headlines about California. And these headlines, everybody likes to say California's falling in the ocean or burning up or earthquakes or whatever it might be. They love beating up California. And so this is something we've got to get command and control over. So we have been working on a whole series of bills from every aspect of this, from technology to early determination of fires to new equipment. The governor has done a great job in putting out just a ton of money for helicopters and all kinds of stuff, and the firefighters, to things on insurance and stuff. We have a whole working group in the legislature, in the Senate, that's I think is doing a magnificent job in tackling this in a very comprehensive way. You're going to see a really comprehensive approach and working very closely with the governor's office. So it's one of the areas from all my areas of experience I'm pretty proud about the work, and I think the work product that's going to come out is going to be pretty strong. And the other thing that's happened here that's really, really important in the big picture thing, which is one of the reasons I came back, is we're transferring from the old model of how we generated electricity to this whole renewables and clean energy. And that's what I've been working on.
Right. That's one of the many wheels in your wheelhouse.
Right.
Absolutely.
I've done a company public in this space. I went to Cardiff, Wales. I had an electric car company I was involved with, and wind companies and solar companies. I was in China and Sri Lanka, and really looking at this big picture. And so we're trying to transition from this old model of these old big generators and all this dirty stuff into this new model. But the problem with the transferring to the new model is that sometimes it's windy and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's sunny and sometimes it's not, right? And everybody wants our lights on all the time.
Absolutely.
How do you do that? To figure out how we reform the system in a way that modernizes the new way to deal with climate change and reduction of greenhouse gases on the one hand, and the other hand, still make sure people's lights turn on. Because I remember I used to go to India all the time. You sit in an office and the lights go out for 2 hours intermittently.
Right. Well, also, too, you want to do all of this without any collateral damage,
That's
right?
right.
With effects on our economy,
right.
job losses, when
That's
in fact we've seen the stats that show a clean energy focus actually can be wonderful for
Absolutely.
our economy.
Well, I think it's about jobs. It domesticates work. If you're importing your energy source and paying somebody else for it versus creating it locally, it's pretty clear. That's what I call it, domesticating energy. You're domesticating the work. And that's why I think it's important, not just for the clean energy goal, but I think it's a new source of work in a very big way.
Your 2020 policy agenda, what are you focusing on between now and the end of this 2-year legislative session?
Well, a couple of things. First and foremost, most importantly, I serve at the pleasure of the pro tem. And anything that she needs for me to do, I do. And it's often I get called into various issues, which is what is part of my job as majority leader. Secondly, as majority leader, it's negotiating and making sure our members get stuff off of the floor, and to the extent there's issues. So a lot of my time is taken up on management of the larger Democratic issue agendas that we have, and the pro tem's agenda, and that's my job. That's the biggest part of my effort, quite frankly. In addition, my bills always are secondary to that. I'm working on blockchain and a lot of technology stuff. I'm really interested. We've got this great image about how great we are in California, yet a lot of this stuff on bots and blockchains and all this stuff, I want to engage in the technology side of the trade. Tax reform, I'm still really interested in. I've been deeply involved in water, all of the issues of water, whether it's recycling water that we do when we take all the stormwater and put it in the ocean. Why do we do that? Big issues like that. And I'm still going to do some more work on bail and immigration bonds, which I think are important. So there's a lot pending, and it'll be an exciting year. And I came to go to work, and I'm working hard, and it's pretty exciting, but it's challenging. But that's what I signed up for, and I'm happy to do it.
At the end of the session, the governor is the ultimate decider. How many governors have you served under now or collaborated with?
various forms. I mean, I was here working for Merv Dimely when Ronald Reagan was governor,
yes.
right? And then you got Ronald Reagan, and then you had Jerry Brown 1, and then you had Duke Machen, and then you had Pete Wilson, and then you had
Gray Davis,
they had Schnitzel, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I worked very, very closely with, right? And then I guess there's Jerry Brown number 2. And then Gavin Newsom.
What do you think of Gavin Newsom?
I like
year
him.
in.
I really like him. I like his mind. Everybody gave him a hard time about his 2 hours and 51 minutes. I loved it.
You did, yes.
Why? Because
for a policy wonk, it was perfect, right?
Yeah, and you know what? This guy has an interest and understanding. He's not just reading. I hate these politicians who just read 3x5 cards and give what they're told. This guy is developing it himself. He's inventing it himself. He's leading it. Now, people argue that, he's spread too thin and whatever. The reality is, I think he had a pretty damn good, successful year last year. And I dig talking to the guy, and I'm very direct. I've been around a long time. I don't mince any words anymore. I don't care. And he's trying to solve problems. People want to zets him for the other stuff, but it's a complex place, and he's willing to engage, and I like that.
Some people are looking to California to succeed. Others are looking to California, waiting for us to fail. The eyes are on all of us for a lot of these issues. The attention means we got to get it right. Is California getting it right?
Sometimes. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And, the reality is we course correct. You stay in the game. You go out there. It's the point that you said Leon Panetta made. You take a risk. You take your shot. If it doesn't work, you get back up and you keep fighting and you keep trying and you tell people the damn truth that you're giving it your best shot, why you did it, why you thought what you thought, and you keep getting up, but do not be intimidated from getting in the fight. And that's the question. Course correct, course correct, course correct. Show your willingness to engage and do not sit back and wait to see where the winds blow all over the place. Just charge forward and get the job done.
Let's talk about the bigger picture, zooming out again to California. There have been a lot of articles in the last few months, as we talked about, on California's 21st century dystopia. The raging numbers of homeless, people that can't pay their rent, the wildfires. We may be home to Silicon Valley and Hollywood and the world's fruit basket, but we are also, in some people's regard, the poster child for the failure to live sustainably, as one person put it. High taxes, our social wokeness, we're driving people out of the state. One article said this is the end of California as we know it. Are we living on the exhaust fumes of a utopian myth, a dying utopian myth?
Not a chance. Part of my research for the book is I've gone through all these old stories. In 1932, when they built the Hoover Dam, they were saying, it's a myth, it's a paper program. When they talked about the Golden Gate Bridge, it'll never carry more cars than the ferry carries. When Pat Brown was there in the 60s on the water policy that he did when he built the canal coming down for the California Water Project, he thought the thing was going to lose. When he went to bed at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, it was down by 20,000 votes. Everybody said it was a failure. It goes to the point when you take a risk. Elon Musk twice almost filed bankruptcy, was barred from his credit cards. Look at Steve Jobs. Every example of somebody who engages, you go head on, and you take on the big challenges. California has done that. I was both on the board of PPIC. I took over Leon Panetta's seat when he went back to CIA, and I was chair of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation. And one had a report that said more people are leaving. The other people said more people are coming. I can't remember which was which. Who knows? There are challenges. There's no question. And the poverty level and some of those issues, no question. The great story I started out telling you, in 1542, there was a great book called The Exploits of Esplandian that was the big novel of the day in Spain. And when the Spaniards, who had all heard about the story, came and the ship came into what was California, it probably was Baja, and it was this great island, California. It was a story of this thing and this woman by the name of Queen Calafia. It was all women who ruled this beautiful island of California by Queen Calafia. And when the Spaniards saw this place, it was what was in their mind's eye to be California in 1542. And that inspiration has been here ever since. And it's not just the weather, it's Manifest Destiny, Frederick Jackson Turner in the West, and all of those elements that inform the American dream, that inform the American character, that inform what California is about, our history. And today, all the new ideas, the new inventors, the new creators will surmount these things. If you go look at the November 1991 front page of the Time magazine, it'll tell you all the same stuff. There's so many of those old stories that I've read over the years that says, get a life. We've been through this rodeo before. We're moving ahead.
We're a blue state. We are predominantly Democrat. We've been a pretty red state in the past. We mentioned Leon Panetta. Speaking at the PPIC, he said he loves California but misses the compromise to the center. That by having such a left-leaning state, it means the Democrats can do just what they want to do, kick the Republicans to the side. We don't need them, no compromise, no work to the center. So no one misses budget stalemates that we used to have where we needed the two-thirds vote. We have supermajorities in both our houses. You're a centrist, though. Do you miss the effort, the process of getting to the center, of having to get your colleagues on the other side of the aisle to cooperate and agree with you? Do you miss that now?
I don't miss it because I live it. I'm going to leave here in about an hour. I'm going to go meet with the Republican leader. I'm going to sit down with the Republican leader and go through issues that go on the floor. I believe that everybody has a voice. There's Republican members here who got a lot more votes than I did to get elected. If you believe in democracy, if you believe in the Constitution, you believe everybody has a right to a voice. I don't step on their voice. I didn't do it when I got elected Speaker. Twice I was unanimously elected by both parties. The Republican leader stood up and nominated me. I comport myself exactly the same way, and I work as closely as I can with them. Now, we don't always agree, and you're right, there are some issues where they're against it, and that happens. But on a personal level, this is not Washington, D.C. And on a personal level, Bob Hertzberg, and under the leadership of Toni Atkins, because she has the exact same attitude. She has a great relationship with the Republican leader, and we don't do that. We just don't do that. We can disagree. You know, you've got to exercise judgment in a responsible and intelligent way. You've got to be reasonable and gracious to everybody. You got to listen to people. That's my big problem about today in a national level. It's just there's not that level of respect that people listen, because I think that comes from some of the stuff that's happening on through social media and the things. But I'll tell you here, I don't have that issue with the Republicans in this House. Many of them are my dear friends, and I can disagree with them, but they're treated with respect, and I believe that they have a right to have a voice, and we give it to them.
Final thoughts, just because I have you here. You're writing a book. What's next after Majority Leader in the Senate? This is hardly your last gig, knowing Robert Hertzberg.
The honest answer is I have no idea. And I don't say that to be coy or to be a politician-y person. I say it because I'm so focused on my homework today. You know, I'm not thinking about doing all the political stuff and who do I build a relationship with and what do I do if I run something new. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I have a zillion options. And what I've learned is that, like when I ran for mayor of Los Angeles, lost by a very narrow margin, I outraised everybody else because they knew I was a real guy. They knew I delivered, and I knew I was bipartisan in how I got stuff done, and I was able to make a pretty good case. I don't have to think about that type of stuff. I'm in a completely different position. And so do I stay in public life? Do I go back out and do public companies? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But whatever it is, I'll tell you this much. It's going to be big. Because I don't sit on the sidelines. I might die flying off of a building. The old story of the guy who gets out the 52 building, he jumps off 52nd floor. Somebody at the 11th floor yells out, "How's it going?" He says, "So far, so good." That guy jumping out of the building, sometimes it's me.
That's
It'll
wonderful.
Be big.
Thank you for not sitting on the sidelines on behalf of California. It is so great to talk to you, to have you here on this podcast, to tap your brain and your heart for all these issues. Hope you'll come back again. We'll do another microphone side chat.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. State Senator Robert Hertzberg, representing the 18th Senate District, or shall we say the communities of the San Fernando Valley.
There you go.
Then There's California is a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus, with technical assistance and great ideas and support from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulty, Brian Shadden, and Rainier Sabiniano, McLeana Woods, Lisa Murphy, and the graphic design talents of Tim Davis. On behalf of State Senate Majority Leader Robert Hertzberg, I'm Brian Green at the State Capitol in Sacramento. Thanks for listening to Then There's California.